Hey, what's going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to be covering DaisyUI. It's basically a library that's an extension of the Tailwind CSS framework or library, if you will. And it's definitely one that a lot of developers are starting to use more often. But definitely, I want to jump into today the power of DaisyUI and how we can best utilize this in our projects. So with that being said, let's get started. So basically in this crash course, what we're going to be doing is just taking a look at a couple of the components that come with the DaisyUI library, as well as jump into a few live code examples. So let's start off by taking a look at a couple of the components that come with this library. And as you see here, I'm on DaisyUI's website, which can be found at daisyui.com. And just clicking on components, you can see the various components that come with this. You have accordions, alerts, buttons, various different types of components here that we can use out of the box. Now, obviously, I'm not going to demonstrate all of these components because it would just take way too long. The focus that I'm aiming for in this video is just to kind of show you some of the out-of-the-box coloring styles, configurations that come within it. We're not going to jump too deep into theming. That's a more advanced topic and we can save that for another video. But let's just take a look at a couple of these components here. So we have the first component here as an accordion. And as you can see at the very top of this documentation, there's usually a list of various different utility classes. Basically a utility class, similarly to Tailwind CSS if you're familiar. A utility class is a special class within the library that we can use to give special styling to a particular element out of the box. So we don't really have to do very much customization as you would have to do with other libraries. We could just simply specify a name on an element and it's going to give us special styling. So as you see here, there's various different properties that we can use, or attributes rather, on an element, such as the collapse elements and various others. And we're taking a look at this, scrolling down here, just want to see what we see here. So as you can see, here's an example of an accordion in action. So if I click on this right here, you can see that this accordion expanded, and we can even take a look at some of the code examples. We can look at basic HTML here, which just shows some HTML markup of how we can get this working on our project, as well as the JSX, which is more commonly used in various frameworks such as React and Next.js. So you could pretty much out of the box use a lot of these this markup and a lot of this styling. And just kind of going back here, let's just take a look at some others. So we have here a badge. And this badge is, most commonly used as sort of like notifications, or just a div that you generally will put over like an image, for instance. If you're a common example is if you have an e-commerce store and then you want to show a special sale or a certain amount of % off of a price, you can use a badge to show that. So it's very cool stuff out of the box. So again, this is designed, this DaisyUI library is designed for us to work straight out of the box with it and to spend very little time coding, because in Tailwind CSS, Tailwind already made things a lot simpler for developers who don't have the best design aesthetics to just simply jump in and start building out very refreshing, very responsive UIs. But generally, DaisyUI is pretty much the icing on the cake. It just adds additional components out the box so that we don't have to spend much time trying to figure out the correct padding or margins and things like that. So let's just go ahead and get started with the installation of this. All right, guys, so the very first thing we need to do is we need to create our Next.js 13 project. I'm working with version 13 of Next.js, but by the time you watch this video, it may be a later version. One thing I want to say is if you don't have Visual Studio Code installed, go ahead and look that up on Google and try to figure out how to install it. It's very simple. Once you get to Microsoft's website, you just simply install Visual Studio Code, and it's definitely the easiest IDE or code editor to work with. I have this open right now, and I've created a folder called DaisyUI Crash, and I'm going to install this Next.js project directly in this folder. So to get started with creating a Next.js 13 project, we simply type in our terminal npx create-next-app at latest dot. And basically the dot just specifies that we want to install or create this project in the same directory. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And as you see here, it's going to ask me a couple of questions. So I do not want to install TypeScript. I don't want to install ESLint. I do want to install Tailwind CSS. And the reason why is because DaisyUI depends on Tailwind CSS for it to work. So you need to get this installed as well. We can go ahead and go default on the source directory, and on the app router, we'll go ahead and go with the default here. And we'll go with the default here as well. So now we should have that installed. And as you can see here on the left side, we see that we actually have a Next.js project. So let's go ahead and run this just to make sure things are working. So to run this, we need to run a special command, and it's going to be npm run dev. So in terminal, we're going to type in npm run dev, hit enter. And as you can see, it's going to start up the server. So now what we need to do is go back to our browser, and let's open up a new tab. And in our browser window, we're going to type in localhost :3000. So it's just going to take a minute to load that. Okay, and as you can see, we actually have our Next.js view showing here. And this is the default view that you get when you first set up a brand new Next.js project. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to clean this up a little bit. But before I do that, let me go into explaining exactly what you're seeing here in our project. So if you're not familiar with Next.js, don't worry, that's not the prerequisite for this course. Just try your best to follow along as best as you can, because we're just going to be really highlighting DaisyUI and not really focusing on the specifics of Next.js. But I'll just give you a brief overview of exactly what you see here. So the very first thing you see here on the left are several folders and files. Just to kind of go down the line here, we can ignore this .next file. That's basically a dependency file for the project. The very first folder we have here is called app, and this is part of Next.js 13's brand new folder structure. We used to have a pages folder back in the days, but now we're using the app directory to sort of construct our project. So if I expand the app directory, you'll notice we have various files. We have a favicon.ico file, which is basically the favicon that shows in your browser window, especially on a desktop. We also have a globals.css file, which is responsible for the styling of this project. And we also have a layout.js file. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly rename that to layout.jsx. And the reason why I do that is within this project, you may have a couple of .js files, and I like to rename any JS file that's related to the view as .jsx because it helps me to differentiate between standard JavaScript files and files that are more specific to Next.js or React components if you're using React. In this case, Next.js is sort of a derivative of the React library. So in this case, I'm just going to rename this to .jsx, and into the future, any further files or components we'll create will end in .jsx as well. We also have a public folder. We can just go ahead and ignore that, but essentially what that is responsible for is holding certain resources that are easily accessible to the view. I'm not going to go into the specifics of what resources are in there, but just know that I will be coming out with a future video that will be based around Next.js. So just kind of, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it, and make sure you hit the bell icon to stay updated on future videos. So just kind of jumping ahead here, we also have several configuration files. The package.json file is one file that we definitely need to look at. So within this package.json file, we have various libraries that are either installed libraries or dependencies that are required to make this work. Generally, in our project, we're going to be mainly concerned with this tailwind.config.css because we're going to configure our plugin for DaisyUI here. So let's go ahead and do that next. So as I said before we install DaisyUI, we got to do some cleanup in this project. So the very first thing we're going to do here is, as you can see here, just kind of referring back to what I showed you before, we have this default view that pops up as part of our brand new Next.js project. So to clean this up, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my page.js file, and I'm going to rename that, as I promised before, to page.jsx. So you could just rename that. And as you see, we have a bunch of code. This code right now, this markup that we're seeing, is actually the view that shows here. So let's go ahead and get rid of this code. I'm just going to do a Command A to select all and get rid of it. And I have an extension installed here as part of my Visual Studio Code. All I have to do is type in RAFCE, which stands for React Arrow Function. And basically, it's going to create a brand new React Arrow function. So if you're not familiar with React or Next.js, again, there's documentation online, but I have an extension that is called, I believe, ES7 react.js. So you can look for that by clicking the little gear icon down here in the bottom left, and then clicking extensions and doing a search for it. I already have it installed, so obviously there's no need for me to do that right now, but I just wanted to share that with you in the event that you are looking for shortcuts to write faster code. So as you can see here, what it did is it created a brand new React component here, and basically a functional component in React. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off by cleaning this up a little bit. The very first thing I'm going to do here is on line number 3, we have a const page variable. I'm going to change that to const home because I want this to be a home component, or a home page rather. So let's go ahead and change that. And at the very bottom here on line number 9, I will also change that to home. And I'll go ahead and save. And because I'm OCD when it comes to saving, especially when working with front-end frameworks. But on line number 5, I'd also like to clean this up. So I'm going to get rid of this line, and I'm going to put a simple React fragment here with nothing in between. And that's basically just a simple div, because I don't need to specify any class, so I just put that in there for now. We can actually just put the word home here so we know exactly what page we're on. So that should work as it is. Let me go ahead and flip back to our page. And if you see here, okay, so as you can see here, we have home showing in the top left. All right, cool. So let's flip back to our project. The very next thing we want to clean up is we want to clean up any existing styles that we have in our project. So I'm going to go ahead to my globals.css file. Now, basically what this file is a Next.js style file. And by default, as you can see, because we installed Tailwind CSS in our Next.js project, the very first 3 lines are directives from the Tailwind library. They automatically get added to this file. If we never installed Tailwind, we wouldn't see this. So generally what we're going to do is we're going to take out all additional code below line number 3 rather. So let's go ahead and highlight that and get rid of it. And I'm going to go ahead and save. And if I refresh and go back to my front end, as you can see, everything turned white because we got rid of the additional dark theme styling within that file. Great. So the very next thing we want to do is install our DaisyUI library in our Next.js project. So I'm going to go ahead and click on install here on the left. And as you can see, we have several commands that we'll have to run in our terminal. So the very first one we see here is this npm i-d DaisyUI command. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Let's go back to our terminal window. And what I'll do is I'll open up a separate tab here by clicking this plus icon. And if I paste that in and run it, it's going to install DaisyUI. And there we go. So that should be installed by now. So next I'm going to go back to my Tailwind config file. And as you can see here, we have an array that's being referenced called plugins. So what we have to do here is we have to add a reference to our DaisyUI plugin within this array. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that up so it's nice and clear. And to find out what reference we need to use, we need to go back to our documentation here. And we have a line right here that says, that basically shows that we just referenced the DaisyUI package. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this required statement. And let's flip back to our project and let's just paste that in. So as that stands, that should work. I'm just going to add a comma here for good practice. As it stands, that should work. The very next thing we can do here, and let me just go back to the documentation. I believe that there is a way that we can specify a bit more config. So we have here on the left side a config link. So let's click on that. And as you can see here, you have various configurations that you can use within the project. So what I'm going to do to make things a lot simpler here is let me just copy this entire thing here. Let's copy this. And basically we have to add this to our config file. So let's see, where does this start? Okay, so we can just pretty much copy it from here. And let's go back to our config, and right below it, let's paste that in. Let's just make sure we see no errors, should be fine. Okay, we do have an error. So let's get rid of this here. Cool. All right, so as you can see here, we have various configurations that we can specify. Now, obviously, we're not going to use a lot of these in this project, but you could specify the different types of themes you would like to use, whether you want to use dark mode or light mode. You have some base styling that you can use, especially when it comes to responsive design, various things. So to make things a lot simpler for us, we're just going to go down the line here and see what we can use. So basically for themes, we're just going to leave that to false, because if we specify true, that means that we are enabling other themes to be used, and we just want to use a basic light theme here. For the dark theme setting, we're going to use light, so I'm going to change this dark to light. So just type in light there. For the base theme, we can just leave that as true. Style, we'll leave that as true. Util, this is if we want to use special utility classes within DaisyUI. We definitely do, so we'll leave that as true. And then RTL we'll leave as false. Prefix, I think everything else is good, guys. So we're going to go ahead and just leave that like this. So let's go ahead and close out of this file, as well as the global.css file. So now we close out of those files because we don't need them anymore as of right now. So the very next thing we're going to do is, I think we're going to go ahead and start building out this app. We need to build out several components here. So the very first thing I'm going to do here in this app folder is I'm going to create a brand new folder. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking this icon and create a new folder called components. And in this components folder, we're going to have two components. We're going to have a header component and a footer component. So the very first file I'll create is called header.jsx. Make sure it's a file and not a folder. JSX. And in this header.jsx, I need to just create a React functional component. And I'll go ahead and let's see. Let's go ahead and just clean this up a little bit. Let's just add some brackets here. Cool. And then the second one I'll create is called footer.jsx. So this will essentially be our header and footer. And the same thing here, RAFCE, and then we're going to create that, and let's just create this fragment here. Cool. So now we're going to go into our layout.jsx file, and the reason why we are going to go there is because we need to be able to customize our base component, if you will. Basically, the layout.jsx file is sort of like a wrapper for the entire application. And this is usually the best place to put your header and footer. So we're going to customize a few things in here. So let's just kind of go from the top to the bottom so you can see exactly what's in here. Now, a few of these things are specific to Next.js, so I'm not going to delve too deep into this, but we have a reference at the very top to our globals.css file so that we can reference our styles application-wide. We also have here a reference to our font. We're not going to change the font at all. We're just going to leave it as this enter font. Moving down the line here, we have other references to metadata. So if we wanted to change our title and description for SEO purposes, we can definitely do so here. But as of right now, I'm going to leave everything the same in terms of configuration. What I'm going to change is the actual markup. So looking here at this, starting from line 11 down, this portion right here is essentially called JSX. And this JSX here is basically the markup that's related to this React component or this Next.js component. So as you see here, we have an HTML tag, which is essentially the document itself, the entire document. And this HTML tag will get outputted behind the scenes on every single web page. The good thing about frameworks such as Vue.js, react.js, and Next is that we only have to put this in one file and it gets outputted on every single page, and that's necessary for accessibility as well as SEO. So we want to make sure we have the proper HTML structure, and these frameworks ensure that that is the case. We also have a body tag, and this body tag is essentially going to be sort of like a wrapper around our main content. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is, as you can see here, this body wraps a children property that's getting passed into this method. And basically this children property is exactly the markup from our sub pages that we'll create, or our sub components that we'll create shortly. So the very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to just highlight this children and cut it out because I want to add a main div here. So let's go ahead and add a main. So let's do that. And in our main div, I'm just going to paste this children property back in here. So there's a little bit of customization that we'll need to do here. So what I want to be able to do is set certain types of classes on this main div, so that way I don't have to repeat the same exact code everywhere else. So the very first thing I'll do is I'll add a class. Now, as you know from HTML and CSS styling, generally you would set class like this, but in Next.js and React.js projects, you don't specify classes like this. You have to specify class name as an attribute. And the reason why you need to do that is because class could definitely conflict with any other sort of reference within the library itself. So basically they're forcing us to use class name as the attribute to avoid any type of potential collisions or conflicts. So let's go ahead and follow the rules and say class name. And the very first thing we want to do is set a container. So I'm going to use the container class. And then I'm going to set as, this is actually coming from the Tailwind CSS library, an MX Auto. So this is a Tailwind utility class, and MX Auto basically is margin left auto, margin right auto, if you're familiar with CSS. And basically what that will do is center our container in the middle, so that way we can have some margin on the left and right sides of the page. We're also going to add a PT-20, which is another Tailwind class, and the PT stands for padding top, and we're just specifying 20, and I believe that is the maximum number you can specify here. And because we want to give a little bit of padding on the top between the where the header will be and the rest of the content. And also here I want to specify a minimum height of the entire screen height. And doing that will basically take the main content and extend it as far as it can go, so that the header stays at the top and the footer stays at the bottom of the page. So now let's go ahead and bring in our header and footer so that way we can display that on the page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the very top of this file, and let's do it right under this global CSS. I'm going to type in import header, and it gives me an auto suggest, but I'll go ahead and type the entire thing so you know exactly how this works with references. So import header from, and where we want to import it from is our components folder. If you recall, we've added it there. So from there, we need to type dot, I think it's just dot slash components, there we go, slash header. So now we should have our header. So now what we can do is we can come back down here, and let's see, I think the best place to put this is within our body. So I'll go ahead and just add header there and close that out. All right, so let's go ahead and add our footer here. So right under our global CSS again, type in import footer from dot slash components slash footer. Okay, cool. So if you guys are wondering why things are getting kind of resorted, I have an extension for Visual Studio Code installed that when I save, it automatically resorts these import statements just to make things a lot cleaner, just in case you're wondering. For you, it won't have the same behavior unless you install the extension. So now that I've imported footer, let's find the best place to put it. Maybe right after the main. So pretty much the header and footer will sandwich the main div. All right, cool. So now we've added our header and footer. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to pretty much add our header code. So to do that, let's go ahead. We're going to be typing quite a bit. So let's go ahead and add that. Now I'm going to start using a little bit of a shortcut here, guys. I know that header is already open, the file, but if you want to quickly get, and this is just a little pro tip here, if you want to be able to quickly get between files in Visual Studio Code on a Mac, what you can do is you can hold the Command key and then use, I believe it's the P key. Yes, it's the P, and then you could just simply type in header. As you can see here, it suggests the header.jsx file, which is what we want. All right, cool. So we have that file open. So now there's a few things in here that we want to be able to do. So what we want to be able to do is add pretty much all the markup that needs to be added here so that that displays on the page. Let's go ahead and do that. So I think the very first thing we want to do here is let's get rid of this React statement above because we actually don't need that here. We're not going to be using that React class at all. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in a component, which is a built-in component from Next.js called link. So import link from next/link. And what this component does, it basically is an A tag. It's like an anchor tag. So it's better to use this link component in Next.js instead of an anchor tag because it's optimized and it has certain behavior that is more adequate for Next.js. So definitely use this. You can use the anchor tag if you want, it'll still work, but generally it's best practice to use this link component. So going down here, looking at this here, we currently have a fragment in here, but what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna rename this to a div because we're gonna add some styling. So I'm gonna just say div. And one other thing you'll notice here is that when I type, the ending tag also completes. That's another extension, I believe it's called autocomplete tags. You can just do a search for autocomplete tag or ending tag in Visual Studio Code and that'll come up. But other than that, you can just simply type it out if you don't have time to install that. So I'm going to create a div here and I'm going to give this a class name. So class name. And let's see, what do we want to do here? For a class name, let's give it a background of purple -600. So basically this is a Tailwind class to give the header a background color of purple with an intensity of 600. There are various intensities like 700, 800 for darker colors, or you can use like 100, 200, 300 for lighter colors. Just look at Tailwind CSS documentation just so you can become familiar with these utility classes. I'll definitely point out the difference between a DaisyUI utility class and a Tailwind utility class. So yeah, just stay tuned on that. So we have next a text white for a Tailwind class. That's basically going to make all the text within this header white. And lastly, we'll give it a padding, vertical padding of 4. So basically what that'll do is give us padding on the top and the bottom. All right, good. So now that we have that complete, let's go ahead and let's see, what do we want to do here? Actually, what I want to do, guys, is, you know what? I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this to a header just to make this a little bit more semantically correct here. Let's change that to a header. And on the next line, I'm going to add a div, and that's going to have a class name as well. So class name, and this class name here, we're going to give this, let's also give this a container of MX Auto. Again, the purpose of this is just to kind of get something on page so you guys can see the true power. And then let's add another div. And in this div, we're just going to specify div class name. Let's close that out for now. Something's wrong here. There we go. All right, so in this div, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use a little bit of flex box here. So we're gonna say flex justify. Let's see if my autocomplete's working. Justify center. Here we go. Justify center, and basically what that'll do. Actually, you know what? Let's make this a justify between. So we're gonna use justify between. This utility class will basically put spacing between the logo or the brand and any navigation bar or navigation links that we'll add here, which we are going to add a couple of navigation links here. So the next up, we're going to add a logo or a brand. We don't have an actual logo, so we'll just add what we would call like a brand or something like that. So we're going to use this link component, which is again like an anchor tag, and we're going to specify the href attribute, because this is going to be where we want to point the link to, and we're going to point this link here to the home page. So we're just going to use a slash, and in here we're just going to say Daisy, if I can type today, Daisy UI example. All right, so that's going to be our logo. And then next up, what we're going to do here is actually, let's open this up. Let me take this out. What I'll do is let's make this an H1. So let's take that out and let's just say it here, Daisy UI example. And just follow along as best as you can, guys. I'm kind of making these decisions on a whim here. So just follow along as best as you can. I'll try to go slowly so that you guys get everything typed out perfectly here. So then the next thing here is let's add some styling to this H1. I'm going to add here text to XL, which will pretty much output it very large here. Then I'm going to let's give it a font of bold. Yep, that should be good. Cool. Let's save that. And then I think that should do it for the logo part. Now let's go ahead and add some navigation links. So I'm going to create a UL element here, and for the UL, I don't think. Let's see. Let's go ahead and give that some styling as well. So let's say flex and justify, and we want to justify dash end because we want this to appear on the very right. It's kind of like a float right. But since we're using Flexbox, we have to say justify dash end so that it appears to the very right. And then finally, we're going to say items dash center because we want to vertically center the content so that way it's in alignment with the brand. All right. Let's see what else. Let's do font bold just to kind of make things pop out a little bit, and then we'll do a space -x-5, and basically what that does is it puts a little bit of padding between each element, between each link in this case. So that's very important to do so that way things are spread out a bit better. And lastly, for this line, we're going to just add a tracking -wide, and what that does is adds letter spacing. Okay, all right, so now let's think, what do we want to do here? So the very first thing is we want to output a couple of links here. So I'm going to create a li element, and in here I will have a link. Now the li elements don't need styling themselves, but we're going to say href. The very first link we're going to put out here is a link to the home page, and we're just going to say home. Cool, and I'm just going to copy that 2 more times down here. And in this link here, we want this to point to a page. We haven't created these pages yet, but I'll just add these references right now. So we're going to have a login page, and we're going to have a page that just displays a modal. So I'm going to just add a login here on the second line, and then login. And then finally, we're going to make this a modal. So let's say modal here and modal. Cool. Now we'll create these pages shortly as soon as we figure out if we're done here. So I think we should be done here. And then while we're thinking about it, let's go ahead and create those pages now. So to create new pages in Next.js, It's definitely different in Next.js 13 versus prior versions of Next.js like 12 and earlier. So basically what we used to do is, again, we had a pages directory and we would just simply add a page to that directory. So for example, if we wanted an about page, we would just add about.jsx, and then whenever we would go to /about, it would just render the page. But in Next.js 13 and above, we have something called the app directory. And in the app directory, to create a new page, we actually have to create a new folder first. And then within that folder, we have to create a new page.js or page.jsx file. So let's go ahead and do that. What we want to do is we want to create first a page for the login. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, and I'm going to call that login. And in this folder, I'm going to create a new page called page.jsx. And in here, we're going to use our RAFCE, or we can just simply type this out, as you can see here. So you can pause the video if you need to. And in this page, we're just going to call this login page. Down here as well, login page, because again, we just need to make sure that those two are equal. So, and we're going to just put a fragment like that. And then our second page is going to be a modal page. So in here in the app, I'm just going to highlight that again. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it modal. And in this folder, I'll create a new file and I'll call it page.jsx. Okay, and then we're going to add a functional component here as well. And we're going to call this modal page. Cool. And let's just add a fragment like that. All right, so those pages are set up. So now what we want to do is we want to go back to our header. We just want to double check that we're good in our header. I think everything's good here because we've added these links to the pages, so that should work out of the box. So guys, I guess we are clear to go ahead and see if we are good to go here to show the header. So let's flip back here to our browser and let's see. Boom, there we go. So we have our header here. As you can see at the very top, DaisyUI example, that's sort of like the logo. And to the far right, we have our links, our home, our login, and our modal link. Awesome. If we click on it, let's just check that. You probably can't see anything here because we haven't added any material yet or any content yet. But in our address bar here, we have a /login at the very top because we clicked on login. And if we click on modal, you'll see that now we are at the modal page. So it looks like that's working. And if I scroll down, you see that we don't have our footer yet. So we have to go back and add our footer. So let's go ahead and do that. So next up, let's see, let's flip back to our Visual Studio Code. Cool. And next we're going to work on our footer. So I'm going to do this Command P or Control P on the Windows. I believe that is it. And then we're going to go to footer.jsx. Just so much faster doing it that way. So in here, what we want to do next is we want to add our footer. So first we're going to create a footer element. So let's just say footer here. Let's just open this up. And obviously we want to add some styling to this footer. So we're going to say class name. And the classes that we'll specify, again, we'll give it the same purple. So bg-purple-600. And then we'll give it a text of white. I'm not typing well today. Text white. And then in here, we're going to say padding on the top and bottom of 4. And then now we'll put a margin top -4, just to make sure that we have enough spacing between the main content and the footer. So cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add another div here. And in this div, closing this out, in this div, what we're going to do is we're going to add a class. And I think we'll go ahead and we'll add the same class, the same container class here, just to keep things nice and consistent with the MX of auto. So let's open that up. And let's see here. We'll make things nice and simple. We're just going to add a simple copyright line here. So we're going to say @ copy, and that's going to give us the copyright sign. That's the escape character for copyright. Let's see what we want to do here. We're going to add a little bit of JavaScript here, because what we want to do is we want to inject the current year, so that way we don't have to hard code it. So we're going to say new, which is going to create a new date object. And from that date object, we're going to get the full year. So that's going to output the current year that we're in. And basically here, we're just going to say at the end, Daisy UI example dot. Cool. So that's going to give us our, that's basically going to give us our copyright line. So if I go back to the browser, we should be seeing that somewhere. And we do. At the very bottom here, you guys can see we have our copyright outputted here, and we see the background coloring, and it's extending the entire width of the screen, and it's sticking to the bottom, as you can see, which is excellent. Great, guys. So now we already have a header with a nav bar, and we have a footer. So the very next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually go back to our home page, and we're going to kind of start demonstrating exactly what Daisy UI can do. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do a shorthand of Command P, and I'm going to go to page.jsx in our app directory, because remember, that's the home page. And currently we just have this home here. We're going to get rid of that. And so the very first thing we're going to do here, and it's going to be pretty lengthy, so just kind of follow along here as best as you can. Let's go ahead and start creating our divs. So the very first div I'm going to create here, we'll have some classes. So go ahead and type in div and close that out. And we have a class name attribute with some classes here. So the first class, we're going to give it flexbox, so we can put that in a flex grid. So then we have items dash center, and then justify center. So we can vertically and horizontally center everything on the page. And then lastly, let's give it a background of gray. And these are all, again, Tailwind classes. So far, we're just doing Tailwind. I'll definitely let you guys know once we're getting into the Daisy UI. Okay, good. So that's what we'll specify, BG gray 100. And then in the next div, let's go ahead and say background white, just so you guys can kind of see the what we're doing here. PD-8, and then or P-8, which is going to give us padding on around all sides, top, bottom, left, and right. So this is how you specify that. It's just P-8. It's a pretty large number. We're going to say rounded of LG, and what the rounded does is it gives us some border radius around the edges here. And then lastly here, let's give it some shadow of LG. Yeah, so that's going to give us some box shadow there. All right. All right, so now let's just see here. I just want to make sure everything cool. I'm just thinking from the perspective if we should add more styling, but I think that's fine. All right, so now I'm going to add an H1. This is going to be our main heading here. So we're going to give it a class name of text 3XL, or a very large text, font bold. We're going to give it a margin bottom of 5. And in here, let's see, we're going to say welcome to the Daisy UI crash course. Okay, so under this H1, let's add another div. Okay, and in this div, let's just give it a simple class of, and I'm thinking about adding this div because I want to add some margin bottom right under this, because after this heading, whatever's in this little div here, we want to make sure we have enough margin on the bottom, so between this and the footer, or whatever the next section is afterwards. So let's just give it a little bit more of margin bottom here, and then we're just going to add a paragraph. And in this paragraph, we're going to give this a class name of text gray. And that's going to give us a little bit of a dark gray, 600. And let's say margin bottom -2. All right, and let's see, what do we want to write here? For our text, we can say, what we'll do is we'll have a similar structure with each section. I think right now we'll just start working with buttons. So let's just say buttons here. Okay, so what I want to show is I just want to show you guys first exactly how these buttons work within DaisyUI. So let's go ahead and start working a little bit with the DaisyUI utility classes. So a button is outputted just like this. So we're just going to use a standard button element, which is just a standard HTML element. And then we're going to give it a class name, and this is where we get into the DaisyUI. So if we want to specify, let's say, a primary button, which is just a button with a blue background, we're going to say btn and then a space btn dash primary. And that should give us a blue button. So I'm going to just label this as primary button. Cool. So if I save that and I go back to my browser, you see that we have a primary button now. So that basically shows us with just two utility classes, we have an entire button on the page. If you were to do this with Tailwind CSS, you would actually have to add so many different classes for padding, classes for background color, class for the text color. But with DaisyUI, you just simply say btn and then btn primary. So if you're familiar with Bootstrap or frameworks like that, it's rather similar. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this line here, and I'm just going to paste this in again, because I'm going to show you guys a couple more buttons that you can play with here. So we have the btn primary button, but let's say, for example, we want to have a different kind of button with a different kind of styling. Let's say, for instance, you want to have a secondary button. Well, guess what? It exists already. So we can say btn-secondary. Hopefully I'm spelling that correct. If I go back, there we go. There's a secondary button that popped up right next to the primary button. So that gives us sort of like this orangey red background color. Now these are fully customizable in case you guys want to know. I'm not really sure why you would want to specify btn secondary and then customize on top of it. What you would rather do is just say btn and then just add your styling. For example, bg-red-800 for red background. But in this case, I'm just going to show you that you can actually override these styles directly in line. So let's go ahead and just add that btn secondary back. And let's say, for example, if I want to change this background color to black, I could just do that simply by specifying here bg-black. And if I go back, it should refresh. Now we have a black background color. So you could just simply do that in line. You can also do that directly in your globals.css file if you wanted to, but I'll save that for another video to show you guys how that works. So I'm just going to get rid of that right now. And so that's pretty much how buttons work, guys. I mean, it's very simple to just get buttons on a page if you need a quick button. And then, my word of advice, though, is if you're working with buttons that you want to customize, like the color, the padding, and so on, then maybe put everything in your globals.css file. It's just better and it's easier to manage versus writing the classes or the special styling over and over again. So it's just a quicker way to do it. But moving along here, because there's a lot of things I want to show you. I also want to show you a bit about alerts. So alerts are generally used to output something to the screen based on a user's action. So let's go ahead and show how that works. I'm going to add another div, and in this div, you know what? I'm wondering if we can save some time here, but probably yes. What we can do is let's copy this. I'm going to copy all the way up to where we have the MB-4, and because essentially we're going to have a similar wrapping div. I'm going to just paste that in there like that, and let's see. We want to call this alerts instead of buttons. Alerts. Okay, so in here, let's get rid of these buttons. Cool. So now, you know what? Let me just copy this like this for now, so we can have it in our clipboard. Okay. So now the very first thing what we want to do is we want to output a success alert. So to do that, we can just use a standard div. Let's try that again here. Div, there we go. Class name. And for this div's class name, we can say, let's say we want to output a success div. So we're going to say alert dash success. And then we could just say success. All right, cool. So if I go back to my home page here, now we see the alert pop up. So we see it right here. Now, as you can see, this is not the most beautiful looking thing, but what this gives you is sort of the building block toward building something nicer. So for example, if we want to make this text white within the success block, I believe we could just simply specify the Tailwind class on top of this. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say text white, and let's give it a bold font. And let's save it and go back and see what happens. There we go. So now it colored the text as white and it made it bolder. So as you can see, this is very, very customizable, the things you can do here. Let's give one more example here. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it on the next line. And let's say, for example, we want to display an error alert. So let's say something happens in your application, unexpected error, and you want to display that to the user. Very simple. You don't need to have a gazillion classes. We could just come here and instead of saying alert dash success, you can say alert dash error. And in here, we can just change this to error just to show the difference. So let's save that. Let's go back. And as you can see here, once it comes up, boom, there it is. So we have an alert message that is an error message. And from here, you can add whatever kind of icons you want to add here. You could just like maybe add some font awesome icons to display here to make things a lot nicer. But yeah, it's just that simple to get started with those alert components. So let's move on to forms. So the very next thing we're going to do here is just build a basic form that has some basic inputs within it, just to kind of demonstrate exactly how this would be done in DaisyUI. All right, so let's see here. What we can do is we can begin it here on this line. We can come down here and create a new div. Let's close that out. And in this div, we'll give it a class name. And I guess I could have just copied this from above, but it's okay. I'll type it out again. Typing is good practice. We'll give that div a margin bottom of 4, and then we'll create a paragraph, and that will have a class name. Now let's see here. Let's give it a text gray of 600 just to kind of do something different here. Let's give it a margin bottom of 2, and I think we'll be good there. Let's name this as forms. This will be basically the heading or the kind of subheading for this section. And the next thing I want to do is let's do another div. And in this div, we'll give this a class name. And let's see what kind of styling I want to put. I guess I can name this, I'll just give this a class of form control. And basically what this will serve as is sort of like the class to sort of label this section. It's not really going to have any use, but it's just a good practice to have something recognizable. The next thing we'll have here is a label. And this label will be basically the label for the input field, the very first input field. We're going to use an attribute called HTML4, and basically this is used for pretty much linking the label to the input field. So if you click on the label, for instance, it would put focus on the field itself. And we're going to call this name because we're going to make this a name field anyway. So this label will be name. Let's just type name here between the brackets. And let's see. Maybe actually, you know what? Yeah, let's add another class here. And you know, I really believe in making things as clear as possible. Let's add another class here. We'll call this label, just so that way we know what it is, right? These are the label classes, and we'll just keep things pretty much intact. All right, so then after that, I'm going to add an input. Close that out, and this input would have the actual DaisyUI class that we want to use here to automatically style this. So let's go ahead first and let's give that, actually, you know what, let's just do things a little bit better here. We'll give it first a type, and the type is going to be text. Now we'll give it some styling here, and let's give this, I believe it's input, so input dash, let's go with bordered. And guys, these are classes that are part of the DaisyUI library. So just look online if you don't know what these classes are. You should be able to find them in the reference documentation. But we don't need a we just need a self-closing bracket here. So I'll just get rid of that additional input bracket. And yeah, let's see how that looks. So after running this, if I flip back to my browser, as you can see, we have the forms here. But it looks like our styling is a little bit off. I actually wanted this to be under the rest of our content here. So let's fix that problem. Let's go back here. And I think it's because I put this div outside of the one above. So I'm just gonna cut this out, move this up here. And right after this on line 18, I'm going to paste this in. Let's see if that fixes the problem. So now it refreshes and it looks like it did fix the problem. So we have our input right here. We have our name, and then we can simply just type within the input. That's awesome. So see how easy it is to just set up an input field, guys. Now, if we were to not use these classes, I'm going to show you exactly how this looks. Let's say if I got rid of this class here. Let's say if I get rid of this entire thing here. So if I cut this out, save, and go back, when it refreshes, you see that it gives us a very ugly input field. So basically just adding these DaisyUI utility classes gives us the perfect styling we need. And you know, if we wanted to further customize this, let's just kind of reverse what we did here and just undo that. If I wanted to, let's say, for example, let's say if I wanted it to go half the width of what it is currently. Let's see if that works. As you can see, now it's half the width of what it was prior because we just put the width of half, which is a Tailwind utility class, and basically it made it half the size that it actually is, because by default, these input fields, just like the alerts above, would span the entire full width of the container that it's in. So in this case, I'm making it span half the width. So as you can see, the sheer power of combining the Tailwind classes with the DaisyUI classes gives you full power. To, you know, and full customization abilities, you know, combining these two types of classes. All right, so let's say if I want to add something else. Let's see here. Now I think what could we do here? I think we can just go ahead and move on to cards. So adding a card. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I showed you input fields. Again, you could do many things there. You can customize background color if you wanted to. You can customize the placeholder color using Tailwind classes. You can do many different things. So now what I want to do is I want to move on to working with a card. That will be the last component I'll show you. If you want to see other components, just simply go to the DaisyUI documentation. So before I do that, let me just clean up some of this indentation here, because I like my things to be indented, my lines to be perfectly indented here. So I think that's good there, then there, and there, and there. Okay, so we should be good now. All right, so now what we want to do next is we want to just work with cards. So basically a card is simply a sort of like a background space that serves as a container for any content within it. So commonly cards are used to display things like images or image and text combos, or any types of special sort of divs that you wanted to put on the page in order to display certain special content like text, as I mentioned, or other kinds of formatted content. So I'll just kind of, I think the best way to describe this is just to show you through an example here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing as I did earlier, and I'm going to define a new div. I'll give that a class name of MB-4 to give us some margin bottom. And I think the next thing we'll do is let's give this a paragraph as well with a class name. And again, I could have copied this from above, but I'm just going to type this out. We'll give this a class name of card, and then a padding of 4 all around, left, right, bottom, and top. And here, let's see, let's open that up. And within this card, I'm going to put an H2 or a heading 2. And then within this H2, I'll give this a class name. And I'm going to give this a pretty big text. So let's say text, and we'll go with extra large text. And then in here, we'll give this a font of semi-bold. So we don't want fully bold, but just semi-bold here. And within this, we'll say, let's just say card title, so you know exactly what purpose this serves. So this will be the title of our card. And then next we'll have a paragraph, and we'll give this some class names as well. And I think what we'll do here is we'll give this a text gray of, let's give this a text gray of 600. I'm sorry, to type 500, 600. And then we'll give this a margin top of 2. And for this text, we'll type out here card content goes here. I can't type today. Goes here. So card content goes here. Okay, sounds good. So now if I go back to my browser, let's see what happens. So here we have it. We have the card title here, and again, it doesn't look the prettiest, obviously, but basically we can see here we have our bolded card title, and then we have our card content. So we can definitely beautify this a lot more. The basic premise of us using DaisyUI is not necessarily to have the most beautiful component out of the box. Obviously, in some cases, we'll need some level of customization, but the level of effort of customization is greatly reduced because of the fact that you don't necessarily have to add so many utility classes or CSS rules to get a very good looking component out of the box. So DaisyUI just lets us work a lot faster and more efficiently as developers. All right, so let's go back here. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to show you as far as components. So what we're going to do now is keep making progress on this app, and we're going to next build out our login page. So let's scroll up to the top here, and we're going to click on the login link here. And as you can see, so far on this page, we have nothing because we haven't built anything yet. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up my login page in Visual Studio Code. And in here, we just have a simple fragment. So what we need to do is just start building out this code. So I'm going to leave the fragment brackets here as is. I'm just going to open these up here because we're going to add a couple of divs and a couple of elements within our JSX. So the very first thing we want to do is just define a div. Let's open that up. We're going to give this a class name. And let's see, we want this to be flexbox. So we'll define flex, and just to give it a flexible, we put it within a flexible div itself or a flexible element. And then we're going to define that the flexible element should be styled within columns, just so that way everything will be perfectly aligned vertically, and there will be no need to worry about, tuning the responsiveness of this form, because we're essentially going to build a login form anyway. Next up, we'll specify justify center. Justify center, there we are. And the justify center will basically horizontally center this form within its div or container. And then next we'll say items dash center, which will do the vertical alignment, just making sure everything is nice and tidy. Then we're going to say MX auto on top of that, so that anything that's within the container will be perfectly centered. And then we'll say P-8, that will give us a padding of level 8 within Tailwind. And by the way, guys, if you're not sure what the difference is between P-2, for example, and P-8, Tailwind CSS's documentation perfectly explains how many pixels or how many M's represent, P-2 versus P-8. This does not mean 8 pixels or 8 ems. So you might want to take a look at the documentation just to kind of get a rough idea of what everything is in terms of calculations of pixels and so forth. So the next thing we'll define here is a margin top of 4, just to give us a little bit of margin on the top. And then we're going to make this rounded large so that we have some border radius that's rounded around the sides. And then finally, we're going to give this a shadow of large. So quite a bit of Tailwind classes here. So far, no DaisyUI here. Okay, now we're going to define an H2. This will be our heading. And within this H2, we're going to have a class name here. And we're going to give this a text of 2XL. And then let's give this a font. Let's do what we did before. We'll give this a font of semi-bold. And let's give this a margin bottom of 6. Okay. So this will be basically our login heading. So we'll just say login. This is what's going to appear right above the form. All right. Now good. So we can start on our form. So let's type here form, because this is going to be the actual form in action. Now for this form, we're not going to need actions or methods because we're not writing any JavaScript code or any other programming code that would handle the form execution and handling. So therefore, we're just going to have a simple form element because we're only doing this for design purposes anyway. All right. And then next we'll have a div. And within this div, let's give this a class name. We'll do something similar and give this an MB of 4 to make it consistent as well. And then we're going to give this a label. And let's see, what do we want to call this? First, let's define the attribute of HTML4. And we're going to call this, let's make this an email field. So email, and then we're going to give this a class name of label. Cool. So next up, as you guys may have already guessed, will be the input. So we're going to do an input here and give this a type of email. And here's where the magic starts with DaisyUI. It's just a simple class name of input dash bordered. So just kind of like what we did before in the other file. Cool. And you know what? Just to enforce with here, let's just do a w-full, and that's a Tailwind class, just to kind of enforce that this input should span the entire width of its container. Just in case, because in some browsers you may have scenarios where styling gets overwritten. So we just want to make sure that we're doing that just in case something like that could happen. And let's just define a placeholder so that we can clearly see what we're doing here. And we're going to say example. You know what? We're going to just put an email in here to say example at example.com. So that'll be our example email. So let's kind of take a look at what we got already. Let's go back here. And as you can see, we have our form so far. And I see the example. I'm not seeing, let's see. All right, so let's take a look here. Yes, I forgot to put the actual label. That's what I was looking for. So let's just say email here. Save and go back. And there we have it. So now the email is popping up, the email label. And then we have the actual input field right here, and we can type in it. Now, the reason why I specify type email, in case you're not familiar, is because when this form is being submitted, if you specify a type of email here, the form handler is going to look at this field, and if it's not an email address, meaning it doesn't have the @ symbol and it doesn't have like a .com or .net or any other kind of extension, then there will be a browser error message that will pop up on your screen saying that you have not entered a valid email. So that's very helpful, kind of like a first line of defense to ensure that the user's putting in the correct type of data. All right, so let's move on here. So that's email. Now I want to add another one. Let's see, what do I want to add? Let's add another div here. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to copy this here. So let's just copy this and come here and paste that in. And let's make this a password field. because this is where the user would enter a password. So we're going to give this an HTML4 of password. That can stay the same. I'm just going to change this label to password. And then on the next line, we're going to have an email of, instead of email for the type, we'll have password, so that it pretty much, I don't want to say encrypts, but it encodes the input of the user. And then we're going to give this also an input of input bordered, and then W full for full width. And instead of this here, we're going to say, we're going to change this placeholder to enter your password and save. So if I come back here, we should be seeing this now, and we do. So we have this password field, and if you notice, when I type in here, it's just showing up as dots, because now it's pretty much, it's not really fully encrypted, because a user or a developer, let's say, who's very, very smart, can just simply change this to a text field and then get the actual user's input. That's why you'll need to have additional validation in a real world scenario. But for right now, this is fine, just to kind of show design wise how this works. Cool. So now we have an email and a password field. The next thing we need to do is add a button, obviously, because we want the user to be able to submit. So let's go down here and let's see. For this, I don't need a separate div. I'm just going to define a button. So let's do that, button. And actually, let's keep this on one line. I'm going to give this button a type of submit. And then the class name will be another DaisyUI utility class of BTN primary. Now, if you remember before, I said, let me just type this out and I'll explain this to you. So we're going to do a full width, and rounded, we're going to say full to give it sort of a pill look to it. So that way it's rounded at the corners. And let's see. Yeah, I think that's it for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this login. So save, let's go back, and we see a button here. And this is our button. Cool. With this BTN primary, this is giving us the standard blue button. But let's say if we wanted to have a button that's similar to the colors of the, or the color rather, of the header and footer. Instead of saying BTN primary and then whatever the color is, we could just simply get rid of this BTN primary and then just give it the color. So we can say BG purple, and I think it was 600. So if I save that and I go back, now you see it gives it the purple color, the same purple color of the header and footer. And of course, we want to change the text color to make that look nicer. So we say text white, and go back, and you see now the text is white. So basically, that's how we can just use the base class of button and then apply Tailwind styles on top of it. Now, there is another way to do this, and again, this is not in the scope of this lesson or this course, but basically you can define different types of themes, and within those themes you can specify different types of styles based on the stylings that you would prefer to have within the theme, and then you can reference that through the entire application. Let me know in the comments section if you'd like to see me go through that example. And also, while I'm thinking of it, make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell icon to stay notified when we drop new courses, because we're constantly doing that on a regular basis. And if you want to learn different programming languages, frameworks, and so on, this is definitely the place to check it out. We already have our login form. So, I mean, it was just that simple to create a login form that looks fairly good and fairly production ready. So next, the final thing I'll show you here is how to create a modal. All right, so let's open up our modal class, and basically I'm just going to hit Command P and type in page.jsx, and that's going to be in our modal folder. Now currently we don't have anything in here, obviously, because we haven't done anything yet. So let's go ahead and start defining our modal. All right, so the very first thing I'm going to do here is, instead of this fragment, let's use a div. And in this div, I'm going to give this, let's give it a class name of text center, just to kind of center any of the text or even some of the elements within this modal. Next up, I'm going to define a button, and basically how this is going to work is that whenever this button is clicked, the modal will appear. So nice and simple functionality. Give this button a class name, and the class name I'll give it is btn-success. That's going to make it green because success is green in this library. And then we're going to give this a text of white, and then a text of XL to make it a fairly large text, and then PX of 4 to give it some padding between the left and the right sides, or on the left and the right sides rather. Okay, all right, so now let's see what I want to do next. Next, I want to define an onClick function, and basically the onClick function will be JavaScript that would fire when this button is clicked. So what do I want to do? When this button is clicked, I want to pretty much get the element that we're going to define and then open the modal. Now, there's more than one way to do this. The way I'm going to do this is pretty much the pure JavaScript way of doing this. The proper way of doing this in a Next.js app or a React app is to use state. So generally, for instance, you would have a state. For those who understand what I'm saying, just follow along. Those who you would define some state within the React component, it would open up. You would have a state that would check if the modal is open versus closed, and then you would set the state accordingly based on the current sort of state of the model. But in this case, that's a bit too complicated for this video. So instead, I'm just going to define a JavaScript function here that we're going to call that would automatically open this modal. So let's type in here document.getElementById, because we're going to have an element called myModal1 that we're going to call. So we're going to call the getElementById, and we're going to select the my_modal_1 element. Now, once we do that, there is a special method. It's called showModal. So let's call that method, and that showModal method will pretty much open up the modal. So that's basically how that would work in this case. And again, this is maybe not the most ideal way of doing this. Generally, as I said before, you would use state to do something like this. Okay, good. So now within this button, let's open this up here. What we want to do is let's think of what we want to do. Actually, I don't want to do this. Actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and let me just type out here open modal. We're just going to give this some text here as open modal. All right. So just a simple button that says open modal, and when clicked, it opens the dialog. So now there is a tag in HTML called dialog, and it's just for semantics. It doesn't have any real true functionality. So we'll just use this as dialog to kind of represent our modal. So we're going to give this dialog an ID, and that will be the same ID that we're calling above, which will be myModal1. And then basically within this, we're going to have all of our content. And while I'm at it, on this, I'm going to just define a class name, and I'm going to say modal. And this is going to be a DaisyUI related class that we can use and reference, and that when the button is clicked, DaisyUI will know to display a modal. So now let's define a div within here, and we'll give this div a class name of modal-box. Again, another DaisyUI class. I think I mistyped that, sorry. What did I do wrong? Let's type this out again. So class name, that's weird. It's not giving me the autocomplete in this case. Oh, I know why, because it's the tag below. So modal-box, let me just fix this closing tag here, actually the opening tag as well. So div, there we go. All right, so yeah, this modal-box is basically a DaisyUI class as well that we're going to use here. And then we're going to give this an H3. And for this H3, we're going to just say hello. And that will be our title, our heading. Let's give this some styles so we know. So we're going to say class name font-bold to make it nice and big for us, or noticeable for us. And we're going to give this a text of large. All right, so that will be our hello. Next, we're going to give this a paragraph. let's see, what do we want to say here? We're going to say press. I'm basically going to give the user some instructions of how to close the modal. Okay, so I'm going to say press escape or esc key or click let's say click the button below to close. That's what we'll do. All right, so let's give this a class name, and we'll give this padding on the top and bottom of 4. All right, so basically that's what that does here. I would say let's define another div, and this will be the action. We're basically going to have a button, if you will, that when clicked, it will close the modal. Because as we're saying above, we're saying you can use the escape key or you can click the button below. So let's go ahead and define this div. We'll give this a class name, and we're going to say modal.action or dash action. I misspelled that again. Modal dash action. Cool. So that's gonna that's another DaisyUI class that's gonna basically listen for an action, and when the action happens, it's going to trigger it. So it's event based. So now we have a form tag, and within this form tag, let's see, what do we want to do here? Within here, we're going to define. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to define a method for the form. So let's go ahead and say method is equal to dialog. And what this does, it basically looks at this entire div that everything is contained. It's basically the wrapper for all of this content, and it's going to listen out for the click event, whatever we specify below, and it's then going to handle this accordingly and close the modal for us. So within this form, we define the method of dialog, and let's define a button again, and this is going to be our close button. So we're going to give this a class name, and that's just going to be btn because we don't really need any special styling here. It's just going to look like a link, but it really is a button, and we're going to say close, and that should be it. Let's take a look and see how that looks here. So if I go to my browser, let's go to modal up here at the top, click on modal. We have an error message. Let's see, button. So let's see what could be causing an issue here. Let's go back to our code. See document, get element by ID. Oh, I think it's because I have not specified this as a method. So we have to use this expression here, which is basically we're defining an anonymous method, and then we're just basically calling document get element by ID. That should work. So if I go back here, now you see that basically everything looks fine. Let's see here. But it looks like we're not seeing our link here. Let's go back here. This could be because I'm missing the button text. No, I have it there. So let's see. Nothing's displaying here. Let's go back here. It could be because this is not a client component. And remember, for DaisyUI, we need to use a client component instead of using a server component, which is part of the new convention of Next.js 13. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, at the top here, add use client and save that. And if I come back here, let's see, if I refresh, there we go. So now we see the open modal button, and that's only because I didn't have the use client at the very top. So when you're working with DaisyUI library, you want to make sure that any component where you're using a DaisyUI component, any React or Next.js component, you add the use client at the very top. So let's go ahead and let's see. Let's click this and see if that works. And so when I click that button, as you can see, we see hello here, and we see press escape, or click the button below to close this modal. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click or type escape here. So by doing that, you see the modal close. And now if I go back and click it again, and if I click the close button here in the bottom right, and notice that the close button has a border already, so that looks really nice. As you can see, it goes completely away. So there you go. So now you have your modal. Now, the most practical example I can give of how to use this modal is essentially using it in conjunction with JavaScript, so that if anything happens in terms of like a special event that occurs, let's say, for example, the user signs up, opens an account, or subscribes to a service, you can have state in your React, Next, or Vue application that you'll listen out for, and based on that state, you can decide to open or close a modal or whatever have you. So yeah, I mean, that pretty much concludes everything I wanted to show you about Daisy UI. Again, as I said before, go to the documentation. There are lots of components, more than just buttons and modals, as I've shown you. You have so many different types of components out of the box that you can work with. You can also customize a lot of these using basic CSS or something more advanced like Tailwind CSS. So yeah, there's lots to use. And as you already know, guys, this is a growing channel and your support is very much needed. So please make sure you hit that subscribe button below, hit the bell icon. We drop new videos on a regular basis. Make sure you like this one. And until next time, guys, happy coding.